call the meeting to order. Clerk?
Councilmember Vilsack.
Here.
Councilmember Niss. Councilmember Sharp.
Here.
Vice Mayor and Chair Schmidt.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. Finance Committee is open. First order is anyone from the public who wants to speak. I have no cards. So let's move on to the first action item, new pension reporting standards. Palo?
Good evening, Chair and members of the Finance Committee. My name is David Ramberg. I'm the Assistant Director of the Administrative Services Department. Tonight I am presenting new pension reporting requirements that will impact the city's financial statements. This is a preview of the Government Accounting Standards Board's 68 information that will be included in more detail in the comprehensive annual financial report that you'll see in November. So tonight's just a preview of the figures to come. The reporting requirements are established by the Government Accounting Standards Board, and that's also known as GASB. So we refer to these new standards as GASB 68. And I want to make very clear that it is a reporting change only, and there's no new financial impact to the city, and I'll explain that. Let's see. The city's total pension liability is $289 million in fiscal year 2015, which will be reported in the CAFR that you'll see in November. A share of the liability is allocated to the enterprise funds and to all other funds based on employee pension expense. And this slide shows you, slide 4, shows you what that allocation looks like. So the general fund, of that $289 million, you can see that the general fund's share is $197 million, and the electric fund is the next largest share at $26 million. And then the remaining funds represent about 55.6 million of the $289 million. These amounts do not impact the ability of the funds to maintain positive cash flow, since these amounts are amortized over 30 years and the city already pays the annual required contribution. So with that brief presentation, I'd like to say in conclusion, the new pension reporting requirements from GASB will report the total pension liability at the entity and fund levels in the upcoming CAFR, but will have no impact on existing expenses. Okay, so that's I want to make that very clear. These will not be new expenses in the budget document. These will simply be in the comprehensive annual financial report, which you'll see in November. And I'd like to continue the presentation by turning it over to our external auditor from MGO. David Bullock is here, and they've provided the city with guidance as we've incorporated these new GASB requirements, and he'll explain that.
Thank you, David. So when David and Lalo asked me to come, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to present. I don't want to overcomplicate things. I think the key to the implementation is that it's a reporting matter. It's getting the information out to the users so they understand it and its impact, your pension impact to the organization. So you've always reported the information in your CAFR. It's been there. It was the schedule of funding progress would kind of give you an idea of where you're at in terms of funding your pension. It was always a year or two behind schedule because it takes a while for the actuaries to come up with the information to present. And so as GASB changed the requirements, trying to improve transparency and bringing that liability onto the financial statements, and also improving the disclosures and some of the trend information requiring 10 years of trend information versus just 3. They're trying to improve the information available to users so they understand the impacts of it. The other thing it does is it makes you much more comparable to other organizations. Under the old method, you could choose from 6 different attribution methods. The actuary could use different methods to calculate the obligation. And a lot of the assumptions were more of policy decisions. They were decisions made that would affect the liability on how you were funding it, but not really economically how the plan was actually where your position was. And so with these improvements, It's really simple. The actuary takes the liability and calculates that out with their best estimates and discounts that back to the measurement date. And then they look at what you set aside in your pension trust fund and compare the two, and that's your net pension liability. So there isn't all of the actuarial involvement in coming up with smoothing of investments and so forth in those assets. So it's a very simple calculation. The other kind of complexity, if you will, is that the measurement date is different than your reporting date. You don't often find that in financial statements. You like to either get the fair market value or some historical measurement, but we're actually using a period of time that's a year previous to the fiscal year. So when you get your June 30th CAFR next month, it's going to be reporting your pension liability as of June 30th, 2014. And unfortunately, that's just the earliest that information is available to you as the employer, because CalPERS has to go through their process of giving you the information, and it just takes a lot of time. We're the auditors of CalPERS, our firm is, and so I kind of have a little bit of inside information, and my understanding is they're going to try and improve the timeline, because the city didn't even get this information until July, actually after year end, and we work pretty closely with the city to pull the information together timely. But next year it's supposed to come in the spring, so maybe earlier. So maybe this February, March or something, you'll have that information and you'll have more time to absorb it and get it reported into your financial statement. So this year it all happened after year end just because of the timing of implementation. And with that, I'll turn it over to any questions you may have.
Okay, council members. Reactions, questions?
First? Sure. Okay. So thank you very much for doing this. If I understand what you said, this is basically a reporting change.
Mm-hmm.
There's not any new action that we're taking that changes the numbers. And in fact, there's not any really recalculation of the numbers or anything like that as well. So it's the unfunded liability discounted back to the present, right? But also still assuming the baseline assumptions on CalPERS investment returns, right? And on sort of the rate at which wages increase in the city of Palo Alto. Is that right?
Yeah, they take into account those into the assumptions. And I'm not an actuary, so I'm not going to be able to give you a real good description on that. But just to take one step back, CalPERS, it didn't change the way you contribute to the plan. So you're going to still continue to contribute normal costs and making up for some of that unfunded liability. But it did drive some policy changes at CalPERS, and so there could be operational impacts down the road if investments don't perform well and they have to raise those contribution rates. They did make policy changes because what they didn't want to have happen was a crossover date, a date at which point the assets in the trust wouldn't be sufficient to pay those benefits. And so they made some policy changes to avoid having a crossover date. So there could potentially be impacts down the road on how they develop the contributions. Mm-hmm. But in terms of what really changed, the substance of how you make the contributions and how you fund the plan didn't really change. What changed is the reporting of that information in your financial statements.
So now we'll see this broken out by fund, as opposed to in a footnote somewhere, I think is where it used to be or something like that.
Yeah, just a little bit of a clarification, and it says general fund up there. Mm-hmm. And I think what you'll end up seeing is it's not going to be reported in your general fund per se. You're still going to have fund accounting. You're still going to report your fund balance, which is going to line up with your budget. But what's going to happen is when you convert that general fund to the government-wide financial statements, the entity-wide financial statements under governmental activities, is where you're going to see the impact to your governmental funds. The public safety and all the public works and all the personnel that are in those governmental activities versus the enterprise funds. But you will actually see them in your individual enterprise funds because the liability is following payroll. And wherever you're reporting payroll, that's where that net pension liability is going to go.
Cool. Good stuff.
It'll show up specifically in the statement of net position, and we'll show that when we bring the CAFR back in November. We'll show you where these new lines line up, and we've gone into quite a bit of explanation in the management discussion and analysis, which is the lead-in to the CAFR. So if you read that, we'll have some new language in there that calls out the GASB 68 reporting, and it's specifically where that's added to comprehensive annual financial report.
Could I do a follow-up? Is it going to show up in our budget by department? Will it affect those numbers at all?
No, it does not reflect that way. As David Bullock was saying, the normal annual required contribution doesn't change, so that will show, but this new format that does not reflect in the budget.
But that is shown by department and by enterprise fund.
Yes, the normal annual required contribution is distributed by.
That's just
department.
per employee.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the
That's
last part.
by employee.
Yeah, we bill it up per salary, so yeah, FTE employee, yeah.
So this breakdown here will not affect the number that shows up in our budget.
Correct.
Okay,
So,
so
yeah, so you said something that sort of led into another question I wanted to ask. You said very briefly, you made a reference to, it's good to have this kind of information at your fingertips when you're making management decisions that impact it, right? I think you said something like that, right? And I think that's right. I think, as we try to get hold of this, I think that's, because we make decisions, all the time that impact the size of this. One thing, and this is really a question for you guys, right? One thing that it seems like it ought to be possible to do, but we just never have seen done, is that it seems like we ought to be able to calculate this at any given point in time. I mean, we know who all the employees are, we know how long they've been with the city and sort of what their wages are and which plan they're on and so forth. And yeah, there's 1,000 employees in the city, but we got computers and stuff like that. It seems like it ought to be possible to sort of calculate this stuff in real time. Right? And particularly, let's say we hire somebody. Right? Every time we hire somebody, they're going to get a wage, and they're going to get an expected wage growth over some period of time, and they're going to work for so many years, and they're going to get a pension at some age, and then they're going to collect their pension for some number. And it seems like it ought to be possible to calculate the unfunded pension liability of each individual, right, at the time we hire them. Probably also later on in their career too, right? But at the time we hire them, it seems like it ought to be possible to do that, right? Do we ever do that? Or does any city ever do that?
Well, I'll see if David has a comment as well, but I haven't heard of a city doing that from a finance perspective. Maybe, I don't know, from an HR perspective, Suzanne may have some experience. I guess what I can say is the assumption is that the potential unfunded liability for a third tier, so that's like the last tier that was implemented, is going to be much less than the original tier, right?
Of course, but it's still not zero, is it?
Well, there's various assumptions, so we would have to run it. It is an actuarial calculation
Sure.
that we would have to run. But I think we would have to, one, either use the CalPERS assumptions or modify them to what we believe they may be in a scenario. So we would say, well, okay, run it with the CalPERS assumptions, and then let's modify them to what we believe the return should be, for example, if we don't agree with the return. Then it also depends on whether that person's really going to stay with us or not, because an individual, now that we have changed the structure of the medical package for retirement, we're seeing a different type of turnover. Yeah, in the days I was telling Suzanne before 2004, we were getting a lot of people that coming in here that were very seasoned and experienced, because they knew that all they had to do is, if they had 5 years in the system, all they had to do was work one day and get fully vested benefits in Palo Alto. So you saw a different type of attraction of person and a different reason that people were coming or staying. Now that there's less of that incentive, it's a different scenario.
I suppose that would sort of be sort of like part of your actuarial calculation is expected how much time an individual is likely to stay with the city. Are they going to stay here 30 years or 15? Or what's the average expected life? But it seems like you ought to be able to calculate all that out and make an estimate. And it might not be accurate for each individual employee to some level, but over large numbers of employees. Is there any precedent for people doing that?
I think you can look at it in a number of ways. I think it's a good question. Probably not by the individual in your books, because their future is unpredictable. But most agencies have a different historical look based on their benefit packages, as Lalo said. And so one agency may typically have very long-term employees, and others may have a shorter-term employee. And you can hire someone senior in their career, and the city's going to have a very short, probably liability, a 5 to 10 year liability, as opposed to someone earlier in their career who may stay with you for 30 years. But so it's hard to predict, but what you could do is model different types of employees at different salaries based on, in our actuarial report, you can see the average of our typical, in our actuarial report, it shows the average number of years someone stays here, how many retirees we have, the average salary or their average retirement benefit. So you can do that modeling. But you can also model different types of employees, coming at different stages in their career. I think the one thing that we're going to be challenged with is how the new PEPRA retirement interplays and the new millennial employee who is more apt to move more times in their career. They're not the long-term employee when I started in 1984,
Not the IBM, live and work forever and retire with gold watch at 65.
So I think all those things are unpredictable, but we can look at our average history and look at some of the changes, and we can look at the last 5 years and share with you, what we're seeing.
Well, because so here's what I was thinking about. And by the way, do you want to ask a question in the middle of this and come back?
I did. It was a follow-up to your.
Yeah.
So you were talking about modeling each individual employee.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess the question is that there's an unfunded liability that comes with each employee, right? The way we're currently doing it. So we hire someone, and it's a different unfunded liability if they're tier 3, tier 2, or tier 1. And so what I'm wondering a little bit about is if we start saying to ourselves, every employee we hire, this is what it's really costing the city in terms of, do we then look at that and say, okay, we're going to put, I think what you talked about earlier was, okay, let's put aside some money to deal with that on an ongoing basis. But we may also say to ourselves, well, how do we compensate those employees? Do we say we compensate the tier 3 in cash in a different way than we compensate the tier 2 and the tier 1? And I think it's time we started thinking about how do we align our employee structure so that it works for the city. I think there's concerns about, I'm fascinated when you say the millennials will jump. They may or may not. I don't know if we have any data on this, of millennials who choose to work for government. Everything I'm reading these days actually says the millennials are no different than anyone else. It's just that they have different opportunities, and there's actually starting to move to the suburbs and starting to buy houses. Every generation thinks it's a unique generation, and the world has changed, and this time it's different. I'm not convinced. But what I am convinced is, right now we have very seasoned employees in Palo Alto who could all retire. Not all of them, but a large number could retire, take a different pension, and go get another job with that, right? And at some point, you do that financial calculus, and it makes more sense for them to do that. And so the question is, how do we start to align bringing people in and with a career path that then makes sense on an organizational? I think that's a challenge. I don't think any city's done that. So I think it's an interesting question. Anyway, I wanted to come back to the other stuff.
Okay, yeah, so I think, but you're sort of going the same place, the same direction we're sort of going in here, which is, we're used to working in an environment, some of us are newbies to city and government work here. We're used to an environment when you incur a liability, you're supposed to recognize and accrue it. And, when we hire somebody, to the extent that there's a liability, a long-term liability that comes with that person, normally you recognize that somewhere. put it in an account somewhere, maybe you set aside money for it, maybe you don't, right? But at least you recognize that at that point, we're going to accrue this long-term liability. And, you know, the time that we make decisions is when we went through the budgeting process, you know, back in May, right? And said, okay, the city's going to hire 14 people or something like that. Well, one thing we didn't say there, we saw, okay, here's how much it's going to cost next year with these people. But one thing we didn't see was, here's the impact on the city's unfunded pension liability if we hire 14 people as opposed to 12 or 15, right? So,
Yeah, I do want to make one point. So we get a blended rate from PERS.
Mhm.
They're not breaking it out. They're looking at all the different
Right.
employees we have in the different tiers and what their
Right.
percent of payroll is, and they give us a blended rate. So that's one thing. But it is difficult to. A lot of the unfunded liability is from the past. It's not the go
Sure.
forward.
sure.
So we do have an average.
That's interesting. So I had no idea. So on a going forward basis, you're saying we hire someone, there's not an unfunded liability?
There's the normal cost, which is the go forward. If this person with no gains or losses in investments, if this person's going to retire and what we project, the actuaries projected, and actually John Bartel's probably a better person to walk through this, and he'll be here on November 3rd. But right, that employee walks in with no prior liability. The unfunded liability that is coming from the past, investment losses, and changes in formulas and things of that nature that
So-
were not funded.
That was really
Mostly
going to be one of my
investment
questions
losses.
was, when we look at the general fund, why is it 68% when the electric fund 9%? I mean, what's causing these disparities?
Well, I'll let Lalo talk to it. It's a percent of payroll. That's
Right.
really what you're looking at.
Before we go there, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. If I understand what you just said, you said that the next person we hire, assuming they come into tier 3 is the current one, right? There is not an unfunded liability associated with that person. And that's not actually really, right?
Well, there is a projected cost, and I'll let Lalo talk to it. And that's why your different tiers have a different cost.
Right.
And
Right.
I
But
think
but to be obsessively, you know, explicit here, right? If you sort of look at, you know, what that person's we're gonna give that person as their pension, sort of the net present value of all that. And you take the net present value of all their contributions to their pension, right? Up until that time, right? They're not gonna add up. The city's gonna still have to cover some.
Well, and then.
That's the unfunded liability.
Right, and so that's why I was caveating at the beginning, because, you know, John Bartel will tell you that it's 0 for tier 3. And that is because we would assume that we agree with the CalPERS
CalPERS 7.5% investment return.
and all the other assumptions.
Whatever the assumption on wage growth is.
And that's
So the
why,
actuary would say that actually it's covered for that person.
correct. So that's why I was saying, you know, you may have a different opinion, so we would run it that way, and we would run it, well, what if it was 6 a return, and, you know, whatever other variables you wanted to change. But from a starting standpoint, the assumption is that the fund is going to pay 67% of the pension via returns on investments. Then the other portion, what is it, 6 1/4 is paid by the employee, and then the rest is paid by the employer.
Let me ask a follow-up on that. Suppose someone comes in his 20th year of employment for CalPERS. He's somewhere else, he comes here.
Yes.
So we assume the future. At some point in the future, CalPERS said, oh, we made a mistake about longevity. People are living 2 years longer than we thought,
Correct.
which creates an unfunded liability. Who's responsible for covering?
Well, that's spread over the period of service years, so
But
let's say
it's-
they had 20 and somewhere else and we get 5,
Right.
it's proportionally split among those years.
So if someone can leave Palo Alto, but we might get hit with an unfunded liability 30 years later if he's
If-
somewhere else.
Yes, and the way it would work, let's say that, I'm making up an example, that they worked 20 years here, they left making 120,000, they went work 5 years somewhere else, and they close out either a 3-year or single-year highest at 200,000, and our 20 is at the 200. Not at the number that they left us.
Yeah. So do we pay more if people come here late in their career, or if they leave here and go elsewhere late in their career? Which is a greater liability for us?
No, you're going to have a shorter time. It's all based on the time they're. It's all based on the time they're with your agency. So I was 25 years in Long Beach when I retired. Long Beach will pick up 25 years, and they paid in for the years I was there
But
based
the-
on my projected retirement.
The years they're here, their salaries are much higher, and their pension payments are based on their final salary.
But let's say I stay 10 years here, and I'm at 2% at 60. So 2 times, you're only paying for the years I was here. Long Beach is still going to pay for the 25 years I was there. So,
And-
but
And what
the
were you
rate,
in Long Beach?
I was many things.
No. I meant
Oh.
what percentage?
Oh, I was 2.7.
So I thought you were probably 2.7, right? So Long Beach gets, so if we end up raising your salary to say 200,000 at some point, right?
Mhm.
You're here 10 years. Long Beach then picks up 2.7%, right, of 200,000, right?
Yeah, for the number of years.
I think
You
we
know-
can squeeze Long Beach on this. What do you think?
I'm not trying to.
I'm just saying that you're paying proportionally for the years that someone's with you, and if they leave, the agency they're going to is paying proportionally for those years.
I'm not trying to stop you from asking the questions, but I think these would be excellent questions for John Bartel, being an expert actuary, that he can give you his insights on that perspective. We're giving you our best professional experience, but he's truly the expert in the field. So I think those would be good questions, and we can note them and give them a heads up that they're coming.
Yeah, we can ask him to look at that as part of that presentation.
So just tell me a little bit about the liability allocation, because I'll tell you what's not adding up, maybe it's just, is roughly the general fund is, what, 200 and, what are we at these days? 200,
The budget?
180 million.
180 million, right? 184 million?
Mhm.
And then utilities is, what, roughly 200 million?
More than that.
No,
350?
yeah.
350? So,
So why is it so much higher?
so
than the
why is it
general
all in the general fund and not all in utilities? Why it should be, I thought it would be equal, frankly,
Yeah.
that I didn't.
Well, that's total budget, and keep in mind that the capital and commodities make up a vast majority of
So it's-
the enterprise.
got it.
So
But
you
it
got to
is
look
a-
at
It
your.
is a fair question, isn't
It
it?
is.
Because isn't the city headcount between the utilities and the general fund approximately the same? Isn't it about 500 each?
No, if we're looking at salary too, not the head count, and so it's based on the salary proportion. It's a debate that we had internally, because when this was originally set up many years ago, I think we set up somewhere in the 50s, if I recall correctly. I don't recall exactly.
It's fire and police, isn't it?
Well,
That's what's driving it.
we have a higher obligation there, and then we never really split anything when we send the records to CalPERS. So CalPERS, to them, it doesn't matter what fund it is. So that's why we have to use today's current split of payroll, because we don't have the exact allocation of people.
Okay.
And I don't think it's 50-50. I think it's maybe 1/3, 2/3
Yeah.
on the staffing.
Okay.
Eric, anything else?
No, I think I think I need to send an email to John Bartek. I think I'm really curious about 2 or 3, and obviously the new public, that's for miscellaneous employees, right?
Yeah,
It wouldn't be fully funded for public safety.
Yeah, if you want, you can send it to us. We'll send it out, then we'll
Okay.
reply to everybody, so everybody has the response.
So I just had a few questions.
Yeah, good.
So I guess the first one is, okay, so we're doing this, why do we care?
Well, one, it's a requirement that we adopt.
Oh, right, but you could go, you're going to follow the law. I'm assuming you guys will follow the law, do
Yeah.
things. But as a policymaker, I mean, what are the implications that I would care about? I.e., Are we going to look better than other cities in terms of our bond rating? Are other people going to look at this and say, Palo Alto, you're doing great. Everyone else is paying the minimum. I mean, why would I care?
Well,
Yeah,
that's
fair
a fair question, and that's something you can do. For example, David Bullock was just telling me that in comparison to Fremont, our general fund side was about the same. And they're much bigger, but that's not surprising because we're bigger than a typical city on the general fund because of the support that we have in the other services. But I think the bottom line is to make sure that in our financials that the net position is in a positive position. That's what you care. That's the bottom line. For us, it's a good news situation. There may be agencies where they're in a negative position, and this is a full disclosure. And back to your point, that bond rating agencies would look at that and say, well, what are you going to do? And we have a history in Palo Alto of being proactive. The councils now and before have been proactive in addressing any deficits that we had. So I think it's a good diligent move that we show that we are transparent with you and the community that where our financial position is.
Okay. That's all I had.
Okay. I guess a couple questions. To follow up Greg's, why are we doing this? How does this help us? So let me pursue it in that regard. Does this help us in any way? On page 2, let me have a couple questions on the report. Page 2 of the report. Packet page 13. It says the employer should supplement and update the information in this report with its own financial data as necessary. Now, what does that mean? We're the employer. Do we update this?
You don't update the calculation, the total pension liability and the plan net position information, but what you may update are some of the footnote disclosures. This report is, again, evaluation as of the measurement date, June 30th, 2014, but you may have a later actuarial evaluation that you could disclose in your footnotes. One of the things that CalPERS, one of the things that GASB required is a comparison of the net pension liability to covered payroll, for instance. But GASB changed the definition of what covered payroll is, and it's no longer just the pensionable payroll, but it's all payroll. Well, CalPERS doesn't have the City of Palo Alto's total payroll figure.
Down there.
So Palo Alto doesn't have all of the information that the city would have, and so the city would update its disclosures to include a total payroll versus what CalPERS would have as your pensionable payroll. So things of that nature. So it's just just to bring that to your attention.
Okay, you raised a point about measurements.
Mm-hmm.
You have two definitions here, one of the valuation date and another of the measurement date.
Right.
What's the difference between those?
Okay, so GASB, when they went through the due process of these new standards to get the feedback, a lot of the issues that came up during that process was the timing and how they were going to get this information to the employers timely. And so the concept came up with measurement date that let's give these pension plans a 1-year reprieve to report this information. And then they also gave a timeline of, just the process of information. So CalPERS was considering whether or not using an actuarial valuation date of June 30th, 2014 for this implementation. But they said they wouldn't have that information available until November, December of this year. It just wasn't timely enough.
Does that mean that the measurement data we have here is not final?
No.
It will be revised.
What it means is they used a valuation date of June 30th, 2013.
That's the
rolled
real
that
date.
forward to 14 using
Assumptions.
and then presented that as your measure.
So you'll come back in a year with the valuation date of 2014, but the number might be different than what we have here.
And it will be different. And then those differences are going to be kind of amortized and factored into your number over time. And it's just going to be a continuous, because these numbers are always moving. And I think you mentioned the fact that why can't we have this information real time? Well, the problem is you probably could factor the actuarial assumptions and come up with some number. What you're not going to have are the resources set aside in the trust. That information is just not going to be timely enough to get that information.
Why is it any different than you're doing the CAFRA for us?
Because those investment, which is a huge part, the investment performance of the actual net pension liability is very complicated. I mean, they can't even get the information from their investment managers on some of these, especially commodities, and some of these are very complex investments.
They're valued every day.
3-4 months.
How can they not get them?
No, they're in timber. They're in different kinds of alternative investments that are not easy to.
It's like 18 months
value.
later.
June
No. Well,
this
30th,
is because we're using June
2014.
30th. They have it now, but I'm just saying in terms of getting real time numbers, it takes them a long time to process that information.
I guess the bottom line where I get stuck, asking how do I use this information, is, you present us with an immense dilemma. So we got to look backwards. I know with the CAFRA you look 6 months backwards, but here we're looking 18 months backward. And you happen to be looking at a year that's had fantastic returns.
Right.
So you look at these numbers, and you say, oh, great, aren't we in great shape? Growing 18% per year, and we have a surplus more than we thought. But the decisions we have to make on it are the current decisions that have future implications to them. We hire new people. We set payroll. We set benefit levels. And this carries out not just this year, but 5 years and 10 years from now, we're committing ourselves to a flow of things. So we're being asked to, spend time looking at, 2013, because it would help us make these future decisions. And, I'm baffled. Why don't we look at 1999, where CalPERS had another great year, and say, oh, aren't they smart?
Right.
They don't. I know they haven't picked this year just because
that's
it's
the problem,
great.
I think, with just the CAFRA in general and financial reporting, especially when we're talking about audited financial statements, because there is going to be a time lag of when that information starts losing its usefulness. The measurement that we're getting from CalPERS. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you use the term might lose. Its
and that's when I think
credibility.
you're on a good track talking about looking at projections and maybe get an actuary to help come up with a number, and using the assumptions that Lalo talked about. But
I guess I'm concerned that CalPERS, without the actuaries and stuff, is looking at the current numbers, and they're changing their mind. My understanding is they are currently saying, we've got to change the way we set our discount rate, put it in our favor. And, they might announce that to us at some point. So how can CalPERS ignore this report that says we're doing fantastic? Plan your future on this. But meanwhile saying, hey, we're going to change the rules of the game. What's going on and what are we supposed to do? Who do we believe? The CalPERS that has been audited 2 years before, or what they're doing now?
And, those are the challenges that we have. A couple of things really quick to address some of your points that are good. We are dissatisfied with CalPERS' lag of reporting. All agencies, every time we go to they have what they call an annual educational forum, and it's next week, and I plan to be there and say the same thing again. When are you going to catch up with technology? You should be able to have more recent numbers, so we're on board with you there. I think if you look at page 19 of your packet, or page 8 of the report, I'm looking at the evaluation for the miscellaneous group. And I'll give you a second to get there. I'm looking at
What page?
page 19 of the packet or 8 of the actuary. To answer your point, or give you a potential scenario for your point, if you look at the plan's net pension liability, if you use the 7.5 discount, it's the 187 million. Let's say that we assume that that's too aggressive and it's going to be more in the 6.5, then we have our number, 269. Then we would have to then make decisions, which are what we're starting to do next November 3rd, to talk about how do we supplement or address our unfunded liabilities. That could be a number that you could use from this, or in the actual number that we get next week, which is the actual required payment calculation. And then we start setting aside additional funding, because you may not believe the 7.5 is the right number. So this can help us guide us towards a number. That's one way. That's what the purpose of this tool is, to give us that information. What happens if it goes higher, right? And you may not agree with that, but they also give you that in there.
Now, I read an article, I don't know how credible it is, in the last week, that says they are thinking about setting a new rule, that when they
Yes.
have a surplus rate of return, they will take that and drop their future rate of return by a quarter point, by a tenth of a point, by some amount.
Yes.
And thus that would allow them to have a more conservative portfolio and maybe a more credible portfolio in the future.
Yes.
Now, that seems to imply that they want to reduce their risk and increase our risk by raising our payment rate
Oh.
so they can be in a more secure position. Now, that is deeply disturbing.
It's, I guess you could look at it two ways. The other way that you could look at it is, if you believe that 7.5 is not realistic, then maybe they're coming to reality, towards closer to reality, if you're in that camp.
That's different, taking that assumption and operating on what you think, from them saying, we are going to lay off more of the risk on those who have already committed.
Yeah, my understanding is that what they're going to do is change their philosophy in terms of the risk that they take, and take less risk, and therefore they're going to assume a lesser rate of return. So in a way, it gets to the point that I was making, but it does translate into a higher payment to the agencies. So the dilemma that the board has is that there are agencies on both camps. Some of us are saying, well, let's get to a more realistic risk tolerance and therefore a lower rate of return. We realize that it's going to increase our annual required contribution, but it's more realistic. There's other agencies who say we can't afford a higher increase in contributions. It will deplete our budgets and force us to start drawing on reserves to a point where we're not going to be able to make it unless we make significant customer services. So that's where they're getting the tug and pull. So they're asking for our comments as a board, as a council, as management, for what are our opinions as to what should they do. And this is the period that I introduced the last time we were talking, that they were asking for feedback. And right now they started with 3 options, and now they're down to 2, and it's a hybrid of those 2, because there's so many opinions on which should they go.
When does the council get a chance to weigh in on the options?
I'm not sure are they still asking? Because they met yesterday, actually.
I read an article like that too, and I thought I read that they had made a decision.
They did. I thought they met yesterday, and I think they're recommending a decision. I'm not sure if they adopted it.
What decision?
I think what they're recommending is what Lalo
What
just
Lalo
shared,
said. The
that
article I read
as
said that
they have
considered going to
earnings that
6.5% and decided not to do that.
Well, and they're projecting that, this is what I had read, there's actually an article yesterday after you and I spoke, that as the earnings exceed expected, that they will start using that as the buffer to start lowering the discount rate to try and get to the
As they
6.5.
earn more, they will charge more. That-
Well, I think their alternative was we just reduce now and increase rates to make up the difference, and so they're trying to have a more conservative smoothing approach that they'll use earnings beyond what was expected to start gradually bringing down the rate. But
Okay.
they're projecting, based on, this is what I read, that it would take 30 years probably to get to the 6.5% rate at using that methodology. That's what I read.
When do we get such information?
I just read it in the newspaper.
Right. What-
So,
We pay them how much per year? Why don't they tell us what they're doing?
Yeah, and, we subscribe to their mailouts, and it's not always consistent, and some of it, we met with them last week at the County of Santa Clara building, the county, the school, Mountain View and ourselves, and we were pushing on this issue, and what they're saying is we're working with the league. And so, I guess we have to work through the league in order to, because I was saying, we're not getting this timely information to make these decisions.
Yeah.
there is a webinar online about it I saw yesterday. So there is information that they're putting out, but they're not mailing it directly to us. It's
Could
being
you-
put out more as public information.
Could you send
Mhm.
at least base information that we have? And what's the connection to 68? How will 68 help us with any of these issues?
Doesn't.
No, I think, really what we need to look at is our regular actuarial report, the assumptions on the rate of returns and the fluctuations, and having a policy discussion on how we should contribute funds to what I would consider an annual required contribution stabilization reserve. That way it can help us navigate through those difficult times when there are downturns.
Yeah, I guess I don't like it that all the risk is being put on the city.
Let me see if I can take a shot at this and see if this is accurate, right? So, whether it's $187 million or $269 million, or whatever it is, right? Really, has nothing to do with CalPERS. I mean, that's actually not true because it's on the investment return side. What's their strategy for investments, risk versus return, and so forth. But that aside, it is what it is, right? And CalPERS can say, well, we're going to estimate 7.5% or 7.25% or 7.75% or 6.5%. But actually, that doesn't change this. This is whatever it is, right? What the CalPERS investment return projection changes is how fast we have to pay it off.
Yes.
But sooner or later, we're going to have to pay it off. And so the cities that you described, the ones that are saying, no, you can't change your assumption, they're not going to get away from this either. They're still going to have to pay it off, right? But they may end up paying it off over 40 years instead of 30 or something like that, okay? So in my mind, it is what it is, and we're going to have to pay it, right? I think the lesson from all this is, and I think this is where you're going with your stabilization funds and so forth, which makes sense, is that, we can't rely on CalPERS for this. I mean, what their projected numbers are subject to all kinds of influences. And it's very political, we should just take those numbers and, I don't know, wrap fish in them or something like that. I think we need to have control of this. We need to have our own numbers, and we need to understand what this is. And that's sort of the kind of thinking behind, well, what if we did it by employee, right, or something like that? We're just trying to get our hands around this. Right? And so I think the answer to that question, right, is going to come up in the discussion, in a couple weeks here, right, as we're really starting to get, and whether CalPERS changes their rate from 7.5 to 7.25, 7%, it almost doesn't matter because we're going to have to pay for it, right, whatever it really is.
I guess what the distinction between us and CalPERS is they set a rate that we have to pay.
Right.
So if they lower their rate of return, we have to pay more.
But if they lower, but we're going to have to pay that anyway.
And the risk that they are taking with that money is something we don't control.
So that is an
So
issue,
we are
right?
putting our confidence in their risk assessment.
So that isn't, well, it's, do you mean the risk assessment or the risk that they invest their portfolio in? I mean, the risk here is they got a huge moral hazard problem, okay? Because if they invest in risky assets, okay, we bear the losses, okay, but they bear the gains, okay, which is sort of how the first savings and loan crisis happened. Right? So if it's that, I agree that's an issue. How they report it, it almost, I mean, unless I'm really getting this wrong, it just seems almost immaterial to me because, you know, if they say, well, the rate is lower, so you have to pay more this year. Well, if they didn't say that, we would have had to pay more next year, okay? Because it is what it is.
But that's where the big issue is. It could be we have to pay 10 years from now.
Right.
Right,
But we're going to have to pay it eventually.
Right. I mean, it makes a big difference to.
True. Whether we pay it this year, next year, or 10 years from now. Yes, that makes sense.
We could have a crisis 10 years from now.
That's true.
When everyone else could have one too.
Right. That's true.
If I can jump in to go back to what Susan said, is that, Suzanne, is that I remember being at a CalPERS meeting a couple of years ago, and their goal is to smooth it out. There's no question that's been their long-term goal all along. So you're right, Eric. You know, one way or the other, you're going to pay it. But there's been huge concern throughout the cities about whether or not it's going to drop from the 7.5 to the 7.25 and so forth. That's been the concern I've heard this whole period of time.
Sure.
And to come back to your point, you know, what difference does it make? We will pay it in the end. And to just remind us, we can't get out of CalPERS unless we pay $800 million, roughly.
Yeah.
So I'd say sort of what you see is what you get, because you can't make a whole lot of change here. And if you want to really be nervous, look at the CalPERS board.
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned of just the history. This is from the presentation we got last time, where in the 90s, returns were much higher than the liability. So there was an encouragement by every city to give pensions and be welcome. Pension as a benefit. And they have made such egregious errors, either back here in their estimates of how to pay, or in their rate of return, gross errors that has led to this gigantic liability. The question is, you know, is 68, GASB 68, going to help us say, oh, now they've got it, now they understand? How much confidence can we have in their assessment of the demographics of the retirement, of the risks to take in the market? Obviously, they made some grievous errors in their investments.
68 GASB just takes the same data and puts it in a different chart, right, basically, right? So, I mean, that doesn't do anything.
Well, at least it's being put on the table and communicated, and I think that was the significance of GASB is, you know, don't just say your annual contribution is your cost of the pension. So that was, I think, the goal of GASB, and David can comment. I do think it would...
Pretty low bar for progress.
Yeah. I do think that having John Bartel here will help have a informed discussion on some of this with an actuary, and I think these are all good questions, and we'll make sure that we forward them to him, and we will have a dialogue about that and what the risk mitigation efforts that are underway could do or won't do that maybe we want to do on our own.
I guess one key thing that I'm sort of pushing here is a flow of information from CalPERS to us, and the flow of 68. Oh, let's look back at 2013. That was a good year. We can give them reports on that. Instead of a flow of, what are we thinking now? So, I mean, information from them on their risk and their looking at the long-term liabilities would certainly be a helpful step. let me just ask one other question. Is there something we could ask the city attorney in terms of our rights and responsibilities and abilities to have an impact?
She's right here.
Well,
She's right here.
Where's that rhetorical?
Let me
I don't
add.
think tonight I want a
she-
response, but just...
Molly could give you her legal opinion, but I can tell you that the governor has put in extraordinary pressure on CalPERS to make changes, and he has not been successful. And I think Councilmember Niss told you why. Look at the board. And
You all think I'm kidding. You haven't looked at the board.
Can I ask you a question? Are CalPERS and the FAA, are they still the same, are they really the same organization?
I don't know, Eric. I think we should find out, though.
Doesn't
You
the
know, they go to
governor,
one office on Tuesday and the other on Wednesday.
doesn't the governor appoint the board?
No.
They're
one.
elected.
They're elected.
Half the board.
Yeah, that's true. There is, but it's all,
I guess
Are
I
we
did
quiet
mention the
tonight?
city
It's
attorney.
It's what?
Maybe the
essentially
city
fixed.
attorney.
It's very much like,
So I can't run for the board.
try it.
Yeah.
I kind of like, I think, sorry. The woman who's still the director, correct?
Yeah, Ann Stossel.
I rather liked her, though, and thought she was,
She's made a lot of changes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I would say that, and I've actually worked directly with her on changes that agencies were seeking, and I think in the last 5 years there's been a lot of improvement on communication, and it is challenging because the board is made up of a mix of individuals, but there has been challenge to the smoothing approach. The board is trying to change the discount rate or the investment return rate, and they're trying to do it in a way. They have a lot of different agencies and board members, and it's definitely a significant discussion that's going on.
But
Let's see, I'd ask the question of the
Just two
city
things
attorney.
to add to the conversation, which has been interesting. You may recall that Governor Brown initially put together his multi-part set of ideas for pension reform before PEPRA was passed. It eventually became PEPRA. Governance was on that list, and it dropped off. It was one of the items that did not make it into the final legislation. And he was looking for governance reforms in terms of the membership and balancing out some of these issues. The other thing I would note is that CalPERS views the members of the system, the individuals, as their customers, and as that they have a fiduciary duty to maximize benefits. They don't have the same approach we would like them to view as co-customers the cities that fund those systems. They do not. They do not feel that there is that same kind of duty to the cities. So I think it's a continuing dialogue, but a challenge.
Well, I think, again, we're going back to where you're from this. The discount rate or the investment return rate, we got to estimate that ourselves. Right? And the CalPERS reported rate, or projected rate, it times the cash flows, but it doesn't really make any difference. It affects the timing of the cash flows. We got to plan for it ourselves.
All right, we're gonna
And then
move
this poor guy that's got to listen to a meeting like this every day, that's his career.
Another minute.
Well, we look forward to the CAF.
I'll be prepared.
And I guess we do have another session on the pension coming up
November 3rd.
November
is that what
3rd.
Bartels is coming?
Yes.
Oh, so he'll be here on November 3rd?
Yeah.
Yes, because you got a limited time with him because he had another commitment, and so we allowed for that night to be mostly him with one small general obligation library bond report that is really more information. So you'll have plenty of opportunities to ask questions.
What did you say the date was? November which?
November 3rd.
I thought you said.
Okay, are there any last comments that we want to leave?
Could I say, let me just
Wait,
say, it's not a very kind comment, and I know we're being recorded, but I was invited to go speak at one of their board meetings, and I was quite surprised by I have to search for the right words.
At a CalPERS board meeting, right?
Yes, what I thought was great variance in the ability of the board members and in their motivation and in their, the sort of why they were there. So I know none of that is a kind comment, but I think it sheds a lot of light on this system that we are so committed to that we can't even afford to buy our way out of it. We're in it, and we don't have a great deal of influence. And we don't like that. We much prefer to have influence. So if you think differently, either Suzanne or Lalo, say it out loud, but that was my observation.
I guess my biggest concern is on December 15th, we have the long-range financial forecast. And in past years, our benefit side is growing twice as fast as our salary side. And any increases we have, such as higher payments, will reduce that salary piece even more. So that is upsetting, and we will deal, I guess, with that in December. But that's one of the consequences.
Can I ask one more question? This is another bashing CalPERS question, so it doesn't matter here, right? You know, I got sort of most of my personal investments in Vanguard index funds because the management rate is like 0.4% or 0.25% or something like that. What's CalPERS management rate?
I should know it. I'll have it ready for the November 3rd
They
meeting.
calculated rate in here, 0.15.
Yeah, I think that's it.
0.15.
0.15.
So let's see if
I know it's
that's the
under 2.
updated number, because they just did a change. They dropped off about 100 middle
Yes,
companies. So I don't know if that includes that or not, but I'll double check.
Could I ask one random question, though? When, for example, Stockton went bankrupt, did they drop out of CalPERS? Is that what actually happened, or did they have to hang in there?
No, Stockton definitely is still part of CalPERS.
Okay, so they had to continue, even in bankruptcy, they had to continue to pay CalPERS.
That's the hotel
San
CalPERS
Bernardino tried to stop during the bankruptcy
remember,
period.
yeah.
A friend of mine's the attorney representing the city, and that was definitely a challenging discussion with CalPERS.
Molly, a comment?
Yes, so San Bernardino did actually stop making their payments for a period of time, but they subsequently reached an agreement with CalPERS to pay back that back liability and to continue in the system. No city has exited CalPERS in bankruptcy, and in fact, no bankruptcy exit has involved any diminution of pension rights, pension benefits.
And Molly, has any city paid their way out that you know of?
I know there were some very small cities that actually went through the formal process of requesting a price tag on that, and then did not pursue it because of the cost.
It was Seaside, California.
I'm not aware of any.
What is the
We can confirm
referendum that the San Jose is trying to get established?
So San Jose is
They're
not
not
in the
in
CalPERS
CalPERS.
system. They run their own retirement
But
system.
the ex-mayor is trying to referendum.
He's trying to qualify something for the statewide ballot, which he
Yeah.
has made several runs at that. And so there's been different iterations of what's
But
been
isn't that
proposed.
a base reform of HEPA or something? Transform it?
I'm not sure. He just made some recent changes. What tends to happen is he gets a ballot title and summary from the Attorney General, and then there's a concern about the getting that qualified for the ballot based
He
on.
gets the Kill the Widows and Orphans name title, right, and you have to go back.
That's always what happens, right?
That's what happens,
That's
right?
what happens. So we keep talking about it would be nice if we could exit CalPERS, but then I'm convinced you'd all come to us and say, oh, now we're exiting CalPERS, we can't hire anyone because everyone wants to be in CalPERS, right? So, I just wonder, and I know we all talk about that, but I know that would be an issue. I'd hear about it over and over again for the next, we're now uncompetitive in the market because we're not in CalPERS.
So this was the key issue in the Stockton bankruptcy. They did not actually seek to reduce their retirement payments for this reason. The city manager, Bob Dice, felt strongly that would make Stockton uncompetitive as an employer, and they were particularly concerned about police officers.
That's right.
It's not obvious to me actually that, I used to think CalPERS was just like these evil guys, right? but it's not obvious to me, I mean, maybe I'm missing something huge, but it's not obvious to me that how being in CalPERS is actually that big a detriment to us, okay? Again, with the exception of the issue of control, okay? Because they control the cash flows, okay? But as long as they invest wisely, and as for their investment returns, I don't think anybody in here believes them at all, right? So as long as you assume that their investment returns are just completely bogus, we need to sort of watch this ourselves. Okay, so that's that issue. And the only other issue I can think of is the strictures they place on what kind of packages we can offer to employees, because we don't have infinite flexibility. We can't come and say, you can take a smaller pension in exchange for a larger upfront payment so you can afford a house here, right? We don't get to do that, so that's a problem, right? But other than that, it's not obvious to me that how CalPERS is that pernicious to us, other than the control issue.
I think it's a control thing. It's frustrating that San Jose, I don't know if San Jose does any better than we do, to be honest. I don't think so.
But at least they have control.
But they've got control.
But the downside is not just control, it's cost. We are paying twice as much each year. The increase is twice as high on our benefit package as it is for our salaries.
As it is for
Salaries.
Well, we'd probably do a radical restructuring program, right? We'd probably we'd pay like twice salaries what any other city pays, and have much less benefits,
right.
and put everything in a 401k,
Right.
and we'd be this completely different model,
Right.
and you'd come work for us if you want a high salary and not have the guaranteed
That's what we
pension.
would do.
Right? So you get different people, but I mean, that's what we did,
Right. So CalPERS stopped us from doing it.
right? So
But the size of the unfunded pension liability, we did that. Okay, CalPERS didn't do that. I mean, we shouldn't have believed CalPERS, right? They gave us bogus numbers and we believed them. Shame on us. But those contracts that we're going to have to pay off, we entered those contracts, not CalPERS. Okay?
Just for the fun of it, don't I remember Willie Brown was on the board for quite a while? Pretty sure.
on the CalPERS.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he was on CalPERS.
We'll go Google.
let's get him on the phone.
Okay, I think we could go
Right.
round and round, but we do have a date on November 3rd. So, and there's no motion we need.
No, we wanted to hear your comments, and we noted them, and we'll pass them on to Mr. Bartel, and any other questions you want to give us ahead of time, it would be appreciated, so he can work on any particular responses.
Great.
Okay.
And you said last time he was limited to 1 hour.
It-
And you're saying this time he's got time for us?
Right.
Okay.
And that's the only item on the agenda.
We
isn't
have,
it?
we have one other small, the Library Oversight Committee report on the bond, but it's small, it's information mostly.
Good. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very
Look
much.
forward to the CAFRA pension discussion. Okay, that completes item number 1.
I do.
Good idea. I'll take one.
Take one what?
Beer.
You're right.
So are you guys joining me on my colleague's memo to allow alcohol in City Hall?
To go allow alcohol in City Hall? I don't think we need it because most of us drink here anyway.
Okay, item number 2, Community Services Department and the Aquatics Program.
Good evening, council members. Rob the Goat, Director of Community Services. Good to see you again this evening. I'm joined here with Sharon Eva. Have you guys met Sharon before? Maybe not. She's a manager with the Community Services Department. She does a number of different things. She manages the Lucy Stone Community Center, special interest classes that run year-round, special events, or many of our special events, and the aquatics program and special projects. And we're here to talk about the aquatics program. We just have a brief presentation and summarize the staff report. Essentially, we're here to get your guidance on a recommendation that we put out an RFP for aquatic services for the city of Palo Alto. The aquatics program, largely run at Rinconada Park, has 5 sort of legs to the program. 2 are already contracted out, and they are the Masters program and the Palo Alto Swim Club, which is a competitive swim club called PASA. And then we run some programs in-house, and that is the year-round lap swim program, the Learn to Swim program during the summer, and the summer recreation swim program. And the city hires hourly staff and lifeguards to run that program. The problem, however, that we face, and we've been facing it for a number of seasons, and got to a point this last summer where I think we really need to take a step back and think about how we deliver this service. The problem, as I understand it, I would describe it in this way: we have this wonderful community asset in Rinconada Pool, but I don't think the community has the kind of access to it and the programs and services that could be provided in a great asset like that. So we'd like to see what options exist out there. So our recommendation is to put out a comprehensive request for proposal that allows vendors to bid on part or all of the aquatics operation, and then evaluate that against what we can do internally, and then bring that to the committee for review, and staff would have a recommendation at that time. For a little more detail about this summer, I've asked Sharon to share a little bit about some of the challenges that we had.
So unfortunately this summer we were severely understaffed. We were jeopardizing about 40% of our swim lessons to be canceled. So in that emergency, we went ahead and we contracted out with Team Sheeper. And with hiring them, we were able to provide very qualified and professional swim instructor and lifeguards to oversee the programming at our JLS pool. And with hiring them, they were able to provide services for 97 sections of group and private lessons. And that included 483 youth participants, and it brought in a net revenue for our aquatics program of $42,000. So right now we are currently in our fall season, and we are still experiencing staff shortages. So within the past few weeks, our aquatics coordinator, myself, our front desk customer service staff had to go to the pool to cover lifeguarding and cashiering just to assist. And we are predicting that our next season, which is winter 2016, we will be facing the same issues in regards to inadequate staffing. And so the problem that we're thinking in regards to staffing is that CSD is spread very thin. We do a lot with less than adequate resources.
Let me jump in here.
Okay.
So the aquatics program has one full-time recreation coordinator that supports the program, and the rest of the staff are hourly staff, and they're mostly seasonal staff because we don't run a year-round program. So that compromises our ability to keep staff on, particularly after the summer when the kids will go back to school. But the public still wants to see services through September and even sometimes October when the weather's great and they want to be able to swim, and we can't seem to hire sufficient staff to keep the pool open. The pay rates that we have for the staff are not as good as what kids can get in other places, particularly year-round swim instruction, and they pay significantly more. At the JCC, I think they pay $20, $25 an hour or something. We pay between 10 and 15 or somewhere in that range. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we've experienced is that being a lifeguard and a swim instructor is not that cool anymore. It's changed over the years.
Too bad.
I know, it seems it really was the thing to do when I was younger. But no, not so much anymore. There's so many options for people here, and we hire a lot of Palo Alto teens as well, and college kids that come back from college, and they want to be doing internships and other things to add to their interest in their career, and there are a lot of options here. And the other thing is that being a lifeguard is there's some danger and risk involved, and so that scares some people, and also you get paid $10 to $15 an hour, but you've got to take a CPR class, you've got to take first aid, now you've got to know how to run an AED, thing, and So there's the market has changed and the pool has changed out there. So that's kind of how we, and this isn't just unique to Palo Alto. There's lots of communities around the country sort of facing sort of lifeguard shortages. So this is something that others are experiencing. So as we thought about our options here, we also looked at what other cities are doing, and we have a couple of examples in the staff report. Menlo Park is an example. They built a brand new pool at Burgess. They didn't have the funding to actually support it and guard it, so they contracted out. And they contracted out the entire thing, the whole operation. And my understanding of the lease agreement is they pay $3,000 for a monthly lease of that pool, and then they're running the pool year-round with lessons far beyond what we're able to do in Canada with our in-house program. Which is kind of interesting to me. It's like, well, gee, maybe we could do more if we did it in a different way. San Jose recently contracted out some of their pools as well. Morgan Hill has an interesting private-public partnership with the YMCA. And as I mentioned earlier, our program is sort of this hybrid. We have a couple of contracts, and then we do some in-house stuff. So our recommendation is that we do put out this RFP, see if there is a possibility to enhance the level of service at or below current costs, and possibility of adding new programs such as Nova Swim, diving, aqua aerobics, some of the things that we know we've heard that are interested, we haven't been able to supply. So I think I'll leave it there. We put the budget in the staff report. You've seen that. Certainly can answer some questions about that if you have it. Our interest is to put the RFP out rather quickly so that we can be ready for next summer, if possible, to make sure we can meet the demands of the Palo Alto community.
Okay.
Let's see, let me ask one question. You're asking the Finance Committee to approve your going out with the RFP rather than make a recommendation to Council. Is that right?
I think actually it's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation, approval to go to the council for the full recommendation.
Okay, so you do need the...
Well, I would ask that, I think we need it. If we don't need it, I think that would be...
I do.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Suzanne? What did you-
I was going to say that the recommendation actually is to,
Yeah.
You're right.
right,
It's a recommendation, Finance Committee to Council, that we put out an RFP for the aquatics program. And I think that was, when it went through the staff review process, that was where.
Okay, so our goal is to make a recommendation to Council.
Yes.
Okay.
Could I ask if we have an expert here? Eric, are you a swimmer? And where do you swim?
I was going to ask Molly this. I assume this is going to be okay, but I am a member of Menlo Swim and Sport and Team Sheeper and have been for about 5 years. I know those people really, really well, but they don't pay me, right? I pay them, right? So there's no reason I can't be part of this discussion, right?
Oh, absolutely not. You're absolutely fine. Your expertise is good.
I'm not familiar with the Palo Alto operation, so I can't comment. I know the Sheeper people, the ones that you hired, very well. Crack operation. They're very well organized. They run 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. 24/7 all year round. They got a blizzard of programs. The facilities are always packed with people. But they look perfectly good to me.
So I guess what I would say is, first of all, I'm really glad you brought this to us. This seems like a no-brainer. Go do the RFP. And so in your RFP, I guess I wanted to understand the scope of it. I mean, on one end, there's basically outsourcing the entire thing to like Team Sheeper or somebody else who bids on it.
Right.
So you're definitely going to look at that, right? Because frankly, in just reading the report, that seems to make the most sense. But maybe there's some hybrid that doesn't. And then you're also going to look at what other hybrid options, right?
Well, we currently have a hybrid option. This is sort of how it started with doing the RFP, because we've been in a long relationship with the two existing vendors, and I couldn't find the history of when we had gone out for that again. So I said, we've got to put those out there. And then...
Now, who are the two existing vendors, and what's the...
It's the Master Swim Club, run by Carol McPherson.
Okay.
many years. You probably know Carol, she's a long time here. And then the Palo Alto Swim Club, Swim Association, does the competitive swim program. They do it for Palo Alto.
And they do both of those year-round, and everything else
Year-round.
basically ends except for those two things.
Yeah, and so there are some groups out there that specialize in certain programs, like a master's program, and so we could get someone that we think is really good there. Maybe it's Carol, depending on what they supply.
So you could have like a carve-out for those two existing programs, and then do everything else that we currently do. Because I mean, clearly, I think it'd be better if we had, basically the 24/7, all year round, all those. And I was especially intrigued when you said you made more money, right? You said you did it out and you brought in more money doing this. Is that what I heard you say, or did I miss that? When you said something about $42,000 we made it.
Well, yeah. I mean, we were. If we didn't hire Tim Sheeper, we would have canceled those
Right.
programs. But because we were able to bring them on, they were able to lifeguard and staff those swim lessons that would have been canceled.
Yeah, it wasn't a net increase. I think Sharon had said net, but it was sort of more cost neutral.
Okay,
We
more
paid
cost neutral.
premium to get them in, and yeah.
Okay.
But I think what you are saying is, if we do go to this model, it's going to be a positive because of the rent of the facility.
Maybe. I mean, we don't know
Right,
what
we have to
we're
wait
going
for
to
the
get back,
responses, but
and depending on the level of services that
Right.
we're interested in, so we'll have to wait and see that. That would be our hope, that it would be cost neutral to where we are today, or better.
that's the goal.
But you get more services too.
Right.
Well, and
Essentially, yeah.
I just wanted to comment because I think this was really a smart approach that Rob is suggesting. I worked in Parks and Recreation for 14 years of my career.
Saw you on a
and-
TV show.
It was very much like that. But I think going out and having the RFP structured in a way that you can propose all of it, you can propose part of it, and then we can assess the financial benefits and the community benefits of each of those options as to what comes back, and then come back eventually with a recommendation. It may be a multi-year strategy even. Maybe next summer they're assisting with the lessons, and then we may build to a larger program. But it could be any one of, Rob's recommendation is really smart because it leaves open all options and, valuing both the community and the financial impacts of those different options.
And that's really what I wanted to say, as I really appreciated you. You've taken over the directorship, and you've been here, I can't remember, is it 6 months now or a year? Right? It feels like forever for you, right? 20, that's what it feels like, right? It's about 6 months. I really appreciate you going through this stuff and then, thinking about like that. It's great. I mean, obviously we can improve services and do it at a reasonable cost. That would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Schaaf. I hope that's the case. But it isn't simple necessarily. I mean, I think there's the staff that are involved. We have a full-time staff person that oversees this, so there's something that we have to, particularly if we look at contracting out the whole thing, what happens there. There's a lot of hourly staff too that still exist, and the impact to them. There's also things that we need to consider about the cost of services and the cost of lessons and other things that we have, which are pretty low. And if we bring a vendor in, what are they going to want to charge to be able to make a real go of this? So there's a lot to sort of think about before we know that it's really the right thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Right.
I'd like to see.
Well, I think at this stage, great to move forward.
Yeah.
So, because I don't remember, it's Burgess, isn't it, in Menlo Park? And are they relatively new?
Isn't that the one Ariaga built?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We built a gymnasium there too.
I don't know
Yeah.
how old it is. I don't know.
I think it's relatively new, as I recall. And is it covered or not?
It is not
They
covered,
do-
but they put a tent up over one of the pools in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So one of the things I would urge you to do, and maybe you've already done it, is to go look at what our competition is around us. Have you already done that? Have you gone to Menlo and to, I don't know what Mountain View has?
We have JCC and some of the private
Yeah.
groups, the
But
YMCA.
I do know that I had some friends who swam at Rinconada and were not very happy with it and went elsewhere.
Weren't the wet restrooms really disgusting for a while, and it took a while to fix them?
So,
Well, they're
but-
still, the restrooms in the buildings were never replaced when the pool got replaced in the 1990s, so they're 50 or 60 years old. The
So when are we
buildings-
replacing those? When's that on our list?
it's part of the Rinconada master plan or long-range plan. We do have in the capital budget some upgrades to the facility. The tiling and lockers are getting replaced this fall, I think,
Yes.
is the plan.
Because I thought we were upgrading it. I didn't realize how it wasn't as extensive as it
No,
should be.
yeah. It's just some of the mechanical.
Greg, maybe you want to have a tour.
A tour of the locker room, is that what you're suggesting?
I think that's what I was suggesting. But anyhow, I just want to make sure that you have gotten some good idea
We have, definitely. Yeah.
of what goes on around us, just because it would seem as though, well, one of the ways you could solve it is just raise the pay instead of going through an RFP.
I thought about that.
And you probably thought of that.
I did.
So that would be a question.
And we're looking at that too. You know, there are different options to address this, and we'll do that over the fall and are talking with HR about it. But I don't think it's the trend of where we're headed to sort of build up city.
Yeah, we want those pension liabilities.
You just talked about some of those challenges. So, I think it's more likely that this would be, particularly if there are private and non-profit groups out there that can provide the service at a level or even a better level at the cost that we want, and that's...
I mean, it's been my experience in the last 6 years, right, that we don't do, given the high cost of pension and benefits, we don't do low-paying jobs well. That we should outsource all of those, in my view. Every single one of them.
We'll get pushback if we outsource everything now.
I think that
that's not everything.
There's a trade-off to that. I would challenge that a little bit too, just because one of the trade-offs is you lose control, and sometimes that is okay.
So in all the outsourcing we've done so far, it seems to have worked fairly well.
Yeah.
We've done quite a bit since 2009. You know, and they were all those sort of low-paying.
But we picked
jobs.
out very carefully.
I also think part of why this might make sense is the business model, in a sense. Sometimes the nonprofit partner or the private partner has more of a year-round focus to something that we're doing seasonally. So they have access to staffing that is different than we're traditionally looking at. And they meet the market demand often, and they price to the market, so they balance that sometimes. We may structure our agreement to make sure that there are, where they're charging to the market, but they're providing for those who need a lower rate. And so there's all sorts of combinations that we don't always have the same flexibility in our structure, given some of the relationships that, in our hiring process and our rules and regulations tied around public employment. So sometimes the flexibility offers greater access to staffing.
I think that's right, and to address the issue of losing some control is you need to write a very good scope and include all of that. So if we want to have a fee reduction program for low income, then we add that. into
Right.
the agreement.
And
Rob,
I've definitely worked in those
Let me ask
type
just
of
a couple
agreements.
base questions. You mentioned both JLS and Rinconada. Are you running two separate pools?
In the summer, we rent the JLS pool from the school
But
district.
it's just when they're not in school, so really it's Rinconada.
Yeah.
Is it heated?
Yes.
So it is available year-round.
Yes.
There's
And people
no-
swim year round.
Do you have any sense of numbers? How many people are participating on a regular basis?
We do. So for lap swim participation, we have approximately 80 swimmers.
For which one?
For lap swimming, for people that go to just lap swim to
Year
exercise.
round.
Year round is 30,000 approximately. The Masters swim program has 60 members, and they have access to the pool certain times a day throughout the week. The PASA competitive swim program, youth swim program, has 560 members. The annual swim lessons, 1,139 participants. Annual pool parties, we do pool parties too. We had approximately 50 a year. And then we have a junior lifeguard program, which is a small program, but it's for those teens that are sort of done with camp, but they're not old enough to work. And so we get them in a program where we can do a little leadership training and stuff.
Now,
And it's
this
15
is what you've had.
Yes.
With the expanded options you're talking about, would you expect those numbers to go up?
It would.
Or is there a capacity you we have to deal with.
Well, that would be part of the proposal process. That's what you're going to ask someone to come to you and tell me what can you provide. So,
Yeah, because there's conflicts. If you have lap swimmers, you won't have.
Yeah, that's a very
others.
good point, Vice Mayor Schmidt, that it's a balancing out of all of these activities, and the
Yeah.
competitive youth swim program wants more of the pool, and if the master swim program does better, and they don't have that many members, then they're going to need more of the pool, and how does that impact them?
Yeah.
And then we want to do more swim lessons, they need some portion of the pool, and what is the right balance will be something.
Would you
we'll look at.
expect the city to be making those strategic choices, or are you looking in the RFP to get someone to say, here's what we think will work?
So we've pretty much written the RFP, and I was looking at it the other day again. I was thinking about just that very question. I sort of don't want to put it out there exactly how we want it. I mean, we put it how we do it right now. We want them to be coming to us with some creative options of how
Yeah,
we could balance the use of the pool.
yeah.
Yeah.
And how would you provide oversight? Suppose you got someone to do
Mhm.
a whole plan. How would you provide the oversight needed to make sure the programs are running well?
We'd have to talk about that. That's another area where it's often overlooked. You think
Yeah.
of contracting out, okay, it's contracted out, and it doesn't cost anything, and it was really not the case. You have to have someone that's paying
Right.
attention and watching and doing some kind of tracking and measuring. It's a lot different than running the pool, but we'd have to have that capacity within the community services department to do that contract
Yeah,
oversight.
so that should be a part of
Mhm.
your plan.
Yeah.
Will there be teens in Palo Alto losing their jobs?
Another great question. It's a very important part of our program where the swim lessons and the lap swim, all that they are programs, but the hiring of lifeguards and swim instructors is very much a program as well. And we, a lot of times, are hiring Palo Alto teens. And in the summer, we probably have 80 Palo Alto teens on staff where
80.
so sometimes as many as that. We run 7 days a week from 6 in the morning till 9 at night during the summer period. And sometimes it's their first-time job and their sort of entry into the program, and we get to build relationships with these teens and build some life skills. And so that's a big part of the program. We would want to write that into a Palo Alto contract if that's what we want, that there is some opportunity for Palo Alto teens and college kids to be able to get employment.
Yeah.
But you also indicated that's also a problem in that less teens want to do
It's
it.
true.
So it's declining, and
That's
so I think we
true.
want to give the opportunity as much as possible to teens who want to do it. But-
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right, but not be a constraint.
I'd be ready to make a motion.
Okay, I think if there are no other questions,
I would
Liz?
move the staff recommendation and have you go forth after it goes to council.
Thank you very much.
So
I'll
the
second.
staff recommendation is that we endorse this for council.
Yep. So I'll second that.
You want to say anything, Liz?
I think, Rob, you've done a nice job and put it forth, and these things are never as easy as they seem.
Yeah, it's true.
Craig, you have a second?
Yeah, I just want to say again, I appreciate you coming with us, thinking about it, and I think you're approaching it the right way. And I'll look forward to see what happens with the RFP. That'll be great.
What does it cost to put out the RFP, roughly? Do you know?
It's just internal staff. It's,
Oh, good.
yeah.
So you're going to put it on consent for like next week, and then get
As
the
soon as
RFP in?
possible, I would just hope that the city manager's going to.
Yeah, that would be great if we could do it on consent.
As quick as possible.
Because part of the timing is getting the summer catalog out.
We put it out in December, believe it or not, and so, and then it gets, the parents want to sign up in February. So we're going to put that forward anyway and let the RFP go throughout the process. And if we can get into a contract, they'll know what they have to offer. Because
Well, I mean, it
it's
seems
in
like
the-
time is really of the essence.
It
I mean,
is.
You guys really need to get going on
Yeah.
this.
Parents start planning for the summer
They
about
do.
now.
True.
Don't you think? They sign up for camp, they sign up for swim, and whatever's out
Yeah.
there, they're signing up. They're
So-
signing them up.
Only one little question though. It looked like you had a staff presentation that was written out.
Oh,
Why didn't we get it?
it was, we were debating whether to do a PowerPoint or not. I talked to Lalo about it.
You don't have to, but I can look at it and follow along.
Yeah,
It has
and-
more information than what you say.
It was so, and I was talking to Shay. Sometimes it's helpful to have a PowerPoint anytime you do a presentation because it sort of gives you some guidance. And there was no new sort of numbers in there, and therefore we didn't think it was necessary for that. But I'm happy to send it to you if you want to see it.
It just seemed like you had a whole presentation that you were like looking at. I'm like, okay, well, where's my copy?
I guess I would just
Fair
add, I think it's important that you go out, get a wide variety of responses, be able to strategically pick where you want to go. But you have the goal of increasing the number of customers that might be able to use these programs over the year. And you change the finances if you can. Just a little bit better, it'd be good. Okay.
I think it's cool. Usually we're talking about this kind of thing as a way to manage cost. I think it's great that we're talking about how to increase services.
Good. All in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. So it should be on consent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we get to important part of the meeting, the agenda. Volvo?
Okay, so as we discussed earlier, November 3rd, we have Mr. Bartel and the continuation of the pension liability and status and potential options for the committee to consider. In addition, we'll have the Library Oversight Committee report. They're getting close to the end, so this is one of the close to the last reports. It's mostly informational, as I mentioned. The 17th is another important date. I would appreciate if you let me know if you're not able to make it, because we are bringing back David Bullock to report to you what the year-end financial audit results are and where our financial position is, and some of the recommendations that we are making in terms of what to do with the excess revenues.
So it's not just approved CAFRA, but it's also the audit.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Which day is that? That's the 17th?
That's the November 17th.
You are on my dance card.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Then we go to the 1st of December, and I'm calling this Utilities Night. We have 3 items, all related to the utilities. We are hopeful that we're able to enter into an agreement and seek your approval for a new renewable energy power purchase. It looks very promising at this point. Hopefully it materializes that way. We can come and show you the details. You requested as a finance committee that we come back and give you an update on the utilities department organizational assessment that was done a couple years ago. So Val and myself will come and give you an update on some of those recommendations. And then also an update on the local solar plan update. Then we move on to the 15th. The 15th is going to be a pretty full evening. Not only do we have the long-range financial forecast that, usually you give us quite a bit of good feedback. We'll also give you the first quarter financial results, the net energy metering, and Councilmember Schmidt, you'll be happy to hear that the planning department believes that they can bring the comp plan financial analysis that night. They're asking us to put it in on a tentative basis.
Which night is that?
That is the 15th of December.
Comp plan?
So
Wow, that is a full evening.
that is a full evening. Unfortunately, we try to see if we can split the long range or the comp plan to the first, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's doable.
Yeah.
And so that would conclude the agenda for the Finance Committee from staff's perspective at this point.
So I guess I'm a little annoyed.
Okay.
Where's our discussion of usage and placement of pool vehicles? We were supposed to have that discussion.
Yes.
So can we get that done?
What
What do I need to do to get that done?
You don't need to do anything. We heard you loud and clear. We'll follow up with the Director of Public Works, Mike Sarter, and see what we can do there. I know that we've been working on some of the details, so let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, the November 17th meeting might be a good spot if you can get it.
Let me see what we can do.
Otherwise,
Thanks
why don't
to
we
the
just get
clerk's
rid of all
office,
pool vehicles
all of them are
now?
on my calendar.
That would save them doing
I
the
think
report.
that, I think they probably are ready, and I think we inadvertently didn't get it on the agenda. So I just want to say that I did hear Mike talking about that, so.
So the other thing on here is the Police Services Utilization Resource Study from 2013. That's a long time to carry something over. So I guess I just wanted to know. I don't even remember, frankly. I guess that was the year I wasn't on finance. So I don't remember what that's about, and it does sort of sit there glaringly out.
Yeah, you brought it up during the finance committee budget hearings. And
You brought it up, Greg.
and,
Well, it says referral date 2013.
No, right, but because we did a carryover.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not the budget here, but the carryover night, which was about a month or so ago. And
So the referral date of 2013 is wrong?
No. That is correct. We kept moving the funding over.
Oh,
You
got it. And I asked why.
Why? And
Right.
so the police department gave you a response that now they believe that they will be able to get to it.
Oh, that's right. They'll be able to get this done finally.
Yeah,
Okay, I remember now. Thank you.
you're welcome. That's all we have.
But I guess they won't have it by the end of the year.
I don't, no, they need to do
And
an
that's fine.
RFP.
That's fine. I was just curious as to.
Yeah, but we can get back to you on that.
And remind me about the public art ordinance then, what we said the issue is.
Yeah, there was, I believe it was, what was not included. I'm a little vague on it, but I remember that there was some confusion on what was included and what wasn't included. And there was a discussion that we should bring it back to discuss that as to how should it be captured in terms of the projects and what gets in and what gets out.
I guess they're not going to be ready either.
I have not heard from them. I had heard from Palo Works that they were working on it, but not from CSDL follow-up.
Yeah, it sounds like that should be a part of the master plan.
What I'll do is I'll find out
The decision was to do the, thank you, sorry to interrupt, the decision on public art, there is some cleanup that's needed there and a small issue with the fee, I think that the council directed. And I think the decision was to fold it into the master plan process.
So, remind me, when we had an issue with the fee, didn't we refer that to finance? Or, isn't that what happened?
Check. I thought that the council directed what they wanted, and it was pretty specific.
Right, so then how did that get folded into the master plan? I mean, it's more of a process issue if the council directs something. How can someone decide to fold it into the master plan? It might be the right decision, I just wonder how that occurs.
So in a complicated ordinance, as we've had experience applying it, there are a number of other cleanups that need to be made. It seemed to us as a staff that it would make sense to do that in a comprehensive way. You raise an interesting point that council did make a direction on one particular issue. If council prefers to see that go forward in a targeted way and not have it rolled in with the other recommended changes.
I mean, I don't have
think there's
necessarily an
any
issue in this specific instance. I just have more of a process concern. I'd have to go back and see what the motion was. But if the motion was to refer that particular issue to finance, then I think we should agendize it. And it may very well be that staff's recommendation is that you do a bunch of other cleanup. I just think it's a slippery slope to say, and it may not have happened here, I don't know.
We should go back and look, and certainly if the council had directed a specific referral like that, we should honor that. If there's a time frame directed, we should meet that. Otherwise, we always assume that you're asking for us to use our professional judgment on how to organize the work, and that we've made a reasonable decision that it makes sense to deal with it in a comprehensive way.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is that the fee issue is so critical to the master plan and where they're going that it makes sense to
Exactly, it may very well.
Okay, if there are no other questions, it looks like we have full agenda. Thanks very much for the updates, Lalo, and look forward to a busy November, December.
Yes, thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.